In 2019, I was in Israel leading a birthright trip, and we were given a little bit of a warning about these new protests that were starting. As a way of bringing up issues that were happening within Israel and the idea that some protesters had against Israel, the protests began to try and convince people to leave their birthright trip in order to go see what they deemed to be more important sites that were showing the unhappiness in Israel. As a New York Times article said, some activists have protested birthright, saying that these trips erase the experience of the Israeli Arabs and the Palestinians. These people, of course, would try and create a scene and bring media in order to try and promote their cause, suggesting that the birthright trips were not the whole story of Israel and leave out some of the darker sides as they saw them. In my experience, I always noticed a very wide variety of Israeli views when we went on birthright, not only as a participant, but also as a staff member. We would see the Israeli Druze, we would see Israeli Arabs, we'd even see a lot of Palestinians living within Israel. Obviously, there are some logistical and safety issues with the idea of birthright groups leaving the state of Israel and going into the contested West Bank areas. However, there are a lot of ways that they try and engage with these type of issues. On every one of my trips, there's always a background in Israeli history and the background of the wars of Israel that led to the refugee crisis. Participants are allowed to ask any question. There's nothing off limits. And the guides do try their best when showing things like the West Bank from a distance or Jerusalem or East Jerusalem to explain the historical significance to the Palestinians. Following these controversial protests, I have noticed a little bit of a change in the birthright planning, where now there's definitely a little bit more of an effort to hear the Palestinian side in order to counteract the idea that it is a very one-sided trip. I have actually on many trips gone to speak with Palestinians and Israelis who are looking for peace in order to work together and heal the centuries-old rifts. Interestingly, the New York Times article also suggests that the birthright protests have highlighted a generational divide between Jews who grew up with the constant fear of Israel's destruction and the more modern, younger people today who have just come to accept Israel's existence and really focus more on the Palestinian issues. Since 1999, when it was first created, things have been adapted and changed in order to reflect the current issues facing the country as well as the people who are coming. To think back in 1999 when this project first started and the first 9,000 participants left for Israel from their home countries, by 2006, when I went, they reached their first 100,000 participants, and now in 2015 have reached over 500,000 people. They have affected so many people in so many different ways to better understand the situation on the other side of the world that maybe they weren't so interested in. Or worse, those people who held ignorant or uneducated views on situations across the world that they had never stepped into.